Welcome. Do we have sound here on Iowa City's Other News? Today is July 26th, Saturday, July 26th, 2003. We're coming to you live from the studios of PATV, Channel 18 in Iowa City by the train tracks and UI campus in the city of Iowa City. And our show today is titled A Bunch of White Guys Talking About Some White Guys on Hate Radio. And we're going to talk about some other progressive issues. My guest today, and we'll see if we can get a shot of my guest today, Greg Thompson over here on my far right, and Adam Burke on my near right. I don't think that conveys to a political setting on the spectrum. Just the way we're seated. We're going to do a kind of ad-lib show today with a main focus on hate radio. And we're going to talk about some things that are happening in Iowa City and the regional area, and also nationally and internationally, as we're wont to do. And then later on we'll have Greg doing Where's the Outrage, our Iowa City's Other News guest editorial.
I'm outraged.
He's outraged, and he's got something to say.
That's right.
And he's going to say it, so be ready for that. First, let's talk about hate radio and try to define hate radio. Hate radio is something that looks at, I would say, non-constructive solutions, oftentimes based on racism, sexism, homophobia, bashing people with disabilities, using those groups of people as the butt of jokes and in a derogatory fashions to try to boost ratings and ultimately make profit for the owners of the station, and also to help set a political agenda. Any thoughts on that? Does that ring true with you folks?
Sounds like you got it pretty close to me. It's a button-pushing game they play to boost ratings, really. So as many people as they can upset, the more people will tune in to find out how upsetting it is, and it's a snowball effect. They're in a win-win situation. If you badmouth them on TV, as we're going to do, people might tune in and find out what they're missing. Yeah, I think you pretty much got it. I know you've been the subject, Steve, of some of their attacks, and I think a big problem with it is that they don't allow people to respond in kind. So we get to come down to PATV and make a show about it, instead of having an open, fair forum on the radio where you could respond to some of the attacks, or other people could respond to some of the slanderous attacks. And one of the stations we look at, or we're talking about, has a lawsuit filed against them for some of the slanderous and things they've said on the radio. And the same station has had lawsuits about the same stuff. What is it? Libel is written and slander is spoken? I can't remember. That's the legal way they break it down. One of them is written down and one of them is spoken, and whichever one it is, I can't remember.
Right. I don't remember, but we're going to try not to do either one of them on this show.
Right.
We try not to do that.
But it's good. I think it's good to talk about what constitutes libel or slander, and I believe it's using information that you know to be false and in a deliberately harmful way to impugn somebody's reputation, or to say something that's not true. So far in the United States, you're theoretically protected if what you say is true, no matter how injurious it may be to the person or their reputation. If what you're saying is true, you cannot be sued. That's not the case in Britain, I know. You can be sued for demeaning or abusing a person's reputation, even if what you say is true. So,
part of the problem is in the United States we have this myth of freedom of speech. I say myth in part because there's a great deal of truth to it, like any myth or any prejudice that might be out there. But also there are other blankets surrounding it that doesn't make it the truism that we think it is, that that it's this thing to be protected at all costs. And in this country, we've seen that access to capital or to money helps you get greater freedom of speech. That's one thing. And we had an FCC, the Federal Communications Commission ruling from the U.S. That will, many people feel, limit freedom of speech even more, because it's going to allow people with more money, like Clear Channel, to get more stations, radio stations, TV stations, control more of the market, and there'll be fewer options for getting the word out and having free speech. Adam, I just wanted to take issue with one thing you said about some of these radio stations not having, allowing people to come on and answer their charges. Well, they do, but it's a rigged setting. And we recently had the case where a nationally syndicated show, Mike Gallagher, came in.
Right.
They're on a local radio station, supposed middle-of-the-road station, KXIC, we might as well name it. And KXIC supported them in part by finding them a place to have their show, this nationally syndicated show, and also they also set up an event the night before. And they came in to have supposedly a fair presentation about the Muslim youth camp that's going on the federal reservoir grounds. And but two people that were invited, a representative from the Muslim youth camp and from the Federal Corps of Engineers, refused to be on the show because it was a rigged game. And that's often the case. You go on these shows, it's a rigged game. And for our assignments for this show, we listened to a couple of these stations that I, and perhaps you two are agreeing, we're calling hate radio, KXIC and KCJJ. And it was pretty tough to take the Mike Gallagher show, especially,
Yes.
which is on a local show, which makes money off of that show. And KCJJ seems to have toned it down a bit. Greg, I know you listened to KCJJ a little bit. What were some of your thoughts on listening to that?
Well, that's interesting. You should mention, this is, I suppose we've done about 20 shows, 15 or 20 shows here. And we've had some tough assignments. We were out in the sub-zero weather filming people going to the Peace March in Washington, D.C. We were out talking to homeless people under the bridges, which was a little scary. But I have to say, having to listen to AM radio was the toughest assignment so far. And not so much from what I heard that it was overtly racist or bigoted or anything, but just that it was so incredibly bad, so incredibly boring. Sophomoric would be a compliment. It was infantile. And, hopefully when you listen to radio, you listen to something that's either informative or entertaining. And I didn't find any of the AM radio stations to be either one.
Let me give you, though, a few quotes from in the past from some of these radio stations that I thought were particularly harmful to our community. And also let the control room know that in a couple minutes we'll run some tape. You went out and videotaped some of the stations and give people a sense of what the buildings look like, the context of where they're at, and some of the advertisers. Because ultimately, if we want to change the behavior of some of these stations, which have the right under freedom of speech to be talking about some of these issues, it's going to be in the pocketbook, and we have to ask advertisers, is this the kind of station you want to support? And here's some things that KCJJ has done in the past on the air. In 2000, they stationed a person outside of the Iowa City Civic Center, a reporter with a microphone and a phone calling into the station, and they rated the women employees as if they were cattle, 1 through 10, coming in to the station on their looks. What kind of women are
Going into the Civic Center.
Going into the Civic
Hall.
Center.
Okay.
People that they thought were employees. It could have been other people too, but
They didn't rate men, though. They weren't.
to my knowledge, they didn't rate men. Sometimes in the late 1990s, they mentioned that an Iowa City sports team playing a high school team from Waterloo, they talked about that Iowa City team playing this team from Waterloo that had significant African-American presence was, quote, just like playing the Ethiopian Nationals, unquote. And there was a comment followed by sustained laughter and the rejoinder, Yeah, but without the flies. This was reported in the Icon Weekly. Tom Walsh, who's a writer with the Gazette, wrote a column for that at that time, reporting on that. In 2001, they espoused using guns to shoot various local people. In March 2002, in reference to Black History Month, one of the on-air personalities said they recruited a black spokeswoman, then played an audio tape of an obvious black hooker soliciting a John Hay Sugar want a party. This was also anecdotal from Tom Walsh, former Icon and Iowa City Gazette writer. And other times they encouraged a mentally ill person to commit suicide. They've said that all Chinese look alike. So they say this is comedy, this is sarcasm. I feel it sets context of a political agenda that moves our country to the right. It buys into a Bush right-wing agenda that ultimately trickles down to things like the FCC decision. They're the people that appoint the FCC chair people, the members, including Colin Powell's son. And they make decisions that make a few people richer. Ultimately, I imagine stations like KCJJ or KXIC, which is already Clear Channel, will be bought out by bigger companies, and the owners will make big money. Why don't we roll the videotape, if you could, and keep my mic on for keep all of our mics on for just a minute. We're going to be looking at some, the first one is KCJJ, and then we'll hear some audio. We asked Roy Justice from KXIC to be on, to have a tape for him to be on the show about talking about Mike Gallagher, and we'll hear his response in
So
just
these
a
are some of
moment.
the advertisers at KCJJ, right?
These are some of the advertisers, and we'll show some of these in print later.
So if you support the racist statements you hear on the radio, feel free to go to these places. If you don't agree with what they say, these are the places to maybe not shop at.
I think businesses they try to be amoral. They try to pretend like these moral issues
Yeah.
don't exist.
Yeah.
And all that really, matters to them is staying in business and making a profit.
Hold that thought just a minute. Why don't you get ready to play that other piece with Roy Justice, and that connects with what you're saying.
Stephen, Roy Justice calling from KXIC. Gonna have to pull the plug on our plans for the appointment we had set for, I guess it was tomorrow. I am absolutely flooded. And frankly, on the whole issue regarding the Gallagher, this and everything, I just think it's a dead horse, so to speak. I mean, he's still trying to do it on his radio show, but that's got nothing to do with me. So I'm going to pull a plug on it because I have just a ton of stuff to get ready for the Johnson County Fair, and I've got to be down at the fairgrounds, so I'm not even going to be here. So I appreciate the offer to be on your program, maybe on a different issue some other time, but I'm going to cancel that appointment. Okay?
You have a downtrodden, Charlie Chaplin-esque figure.
I'll let people know. Again, we're Iowa City's Other News, and it's July 26, 2003, and we're just a few white guys talking about white guys on hate radio and some other things, and we're doing it from a progressive point of view today on our show. And we've got Adam Burke over here and Greg Thompson. Greg, how can I forget your name?
I don't know.
Former editor of Green Acre News, one of our great pieces of literature that was out for a couple of years that tried to talk about some of these issues, tried to write about some of these issues, and it's tough to make it
Yeah.
in this time.
One of the things that ended the Green Acre News was financial difficulties, and from the beginning, we decided that we were not going to do advertising of any kind. Or actually, we did for the first few issues, and then we dropped that because we felt that it was impossible to be supported by advertisers and not have it affect your editorial position. We wanted to maintain that purity, and I think that's something for people to think about. The purpose of radio and television is to deliver your ears or your eyeballs to advertisers. That's how they make their money. And unfortunately, I think the civic interest or, any kind of involvement in fairness, politics, or citizenship goes by the wayside.
You were mentioning before we saw the videos, and again, thanks for those videos. Those are some nice shots. Thanks for going out and getting those. There is a disconnect. I think we all have this disconnect. None of us are pure, and there's always compromises we make. And the question is, when does it become compromise, which is a positive thing, and selling out? And that's what we want to examine in this show, and we want other people to think about. And we want these advertisers. We know that not everyone's going to drop those stations right away, but we want to think, where are they putting their money? So for instance, one of the advertisers on the stations was the Iowa City Federation of Labor. They're promoting a PLA. It's a labor agreement. What's the P for?
Project.
You're
Project
doing
labor,
a show on
yeah,
Project
yeah.
Labor Agreement.
I've been doing a bunch of research on this. They want to do a PLA for one of the 10 projects that was passed by the $40 million bond referendum back in February. So out of all these 10 projects that they're going to build different schools and renovate and et cetera, one of the projects will have a project labor agreement with the schools and the contractors. Now the contractors don't have to be union. I found out they can be non-union. They just have to go through the union office, and it depends on how they write the PLA, but normally PLAs are written so that workers, if they're union or non-union, will get paid a livable wage or a union scale wage. And this is different from most contractors don't pay their people union wages. They pay them whatever they think they're worth, and sometimes that's less than a livable wage. It's definitely usually less than the union scale wages. So, so that group has been advertising on one of these stations for people to support the PLA. They went to the school board. The school board's considering it, as far as I know. They haven't made a decision yet, but it will be the North Liberty school that will have the PLA. So they still have to compromise and work that all out.
Before we get back to the radio, to keep on the PLA theme, so not only in theory is it going to help move the project along in a more timely fashion, or at least a timely fashion, it's also a form of economic development, but instead of the economic development going to a few people like developers or construction companies, it goes to the workers
right.
who do the work,
Right.
obviously, and they spread their money even more so locally,
Right.
and it's better for our economy. You could look at it in that fashion. We don't look at economic development
Right.
that way.
We often look at the developer. Is he or she making a ton of cash? And then we don't worry about the people who he or she has to pay below them. So this PLA will start with the workers and make sure that they're being paid a livable, equal wage, or a fair wage at least. And then if the owner of that contracting company or the owner of that construction crew makes money too, it's just, it's a different way to structure things, I guess.
I would think it would make it somewhat easier for the contractor in a way. Currently, if a contractor wants to pay a decent wage to their laborers, it puts them at a disadvantage when it comes to the competitive bidding process.
Right.
If there were a floor below which they could not go, that would take some of that pressure off of them.
Right.
So to get back to the radio stations, hate radio and other forms of hate media, I think, help, again, promote this agenda, this sort of trickle-down economics. And I think we heard in our last show here on about the Bush group that's in power now. They've been following the Reagan formula, and it's been setting the context through the media. That's part of their plan, is getting their agenda out and setting a context where it's acceptable to do this, that this trickle-down stuff really works, and that you spend lots of money on military, and that you give big tax rebates. That whole agenda is acceptable, whereas 40 years ago, people said
It doesn't work.
doesn't work. In
Yeah.
fact, we had George W.'s father saying it's voodoo economics.
Right.
He knew it,
Right.
and that's a right-wing Republican. So, but now it's acceptable, and
Right.
I would say the media helps do that.
Right.
We're,
Related to that, when W came into office, one of the first things he did was an executive order against federally funded PLAs. Contrast that to Clinton, who had an executive order. I don't know if he had an executive order, but he issued some kind of statement supporting PLAs. So it's a political football, really.
And he's not even the
Goes
most
back and
progressive
forth.
guy,
Right,
Bill Clinton. He's
right.
a middle-of-the-road kind of
Right.
guy. We're going to finish up with radio and talk about a few other things. And I'm going to read a few more quotes from Gallagher's show.
Good.
And while we do that, maybe we can show that list of advertisers. Elliot, there's
A graphic.
a graphic
Yeah.
in there that, again, Greg put together from our listening to the radio stations. There we go. And I'll read some quotes from KXIC from the Mike Gallagher show. And I actually got these from the Press Citizen editorial, which did a good editorial on this issue July 6th. Mike Gallagher said, "Let's not pussyfoot around. We can talk about the environmental impact all we want. A Muslim youth camp could breed terrorists," unquote. This is the guest from that show, Greg Wynn. "This," referring to Islam, "is not a peaceful religion. It's a religion of violence. All good Muslims are terrorists." And then Mike Gallagher, "Not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims." Also, I heard him on another show, Gallagher, use the phrase, "filthy, cowardly insurgents in Iraq," talking about the war in Iraq. He keeps using that term, filthy, sort of a code word for a new kind of racist term. And I think people get the message of what he's trying to convey and spew hate against Muslims worldwide. And that's a big problem, and I think we have to stand up against it. That's why we're doing this show, because we have people in this community that are threatened by that, and we don't want that to happen. We want to invite people into the community. Before we conclude with this discussion, anything else on radio and TV? There were a couple other issues, Greg.
We respond to some of those quotes, but boy.
You know, going back to what we first talked about, when I listened this last week, I didn't find anything overtly racist. And I found myself wondering if Steve Silveroff is toning it down a little now that he's supposedly running for city council. Because I know in the past years when I've listened to the station, I found a lot more racist comments, bigoted comments.
People, organizations that are desperate for funding go to KCJJ, and like the Crisis Center and the Angler.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's part of the plan, is for KCJJ to make those connections. So on the one hand, they seem like they're a community organization and try to hide the other part. And there's other people. We have Terrence Nugel, who's part of KCJJ, that gets some political benefit from it. And it looks like he's aspiring to other office. He might be taking on one of our great progressive leaders in the county, Tom Slockett, for auditor, which would be a shame if Slockett loses to Terrence Nugel, who really hasn't done much for moving our county along in a progressive way. Adam, you were going to respond to
I was
some
going
of
to say,
the-
one of those quotes, the gentleman who knows what Muslim religion is all about, I can't imagine these guys, and I've seen other statements in the paper by the concerned citizens of Johnson County saying that it's a misconception that Islam is a peaceful religion and things, and these people are not Muslim scholars. They have not written books on the subject. They're not professors of Islam studies or things. They're fundamentalist Christians, I believe.
Ooh.
And so they just espouse these things, anti-Islam statements and things, with no real basis other than listening to the Mike Gallagher show, which does not make you an expert on Islam.
Yeah. And they also don't seem to know much about their own history as Christians. They seem to have forgotten a little thing called the Crusades.
And the love thy neighbor and
Yeah.
a lot of things, yeah. They've definitely forgotten a lot of things just to get their point across, that they don't want these people in their neighborhood or in their town or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly every major religion, 90% has a lot of positive things in there, and then there's people, the minority
Right.
in any organization. That
I
are
also
doing some
didn't
bad
know
things.
that Timothy McVeigh, a terrorist, he was not a Muslim, was he? Because apparently Mike Gallagher thinks that all terrorists are Muslims. Timothy McVeigh was not a Muslim.
I guess he was a secret Muslim.
He's a secret Muslim.
It's being revealed here, according to this. One other thing I did want to bring up about radio as a possible solution is micro radio stations.
Oh, yeah.
And the FCC at first was actually going to open up a lot of the frequency to micro radio stations, and then they cut it back drastically.
From pressure from lobbyists, media
Including
lobbyists.
NPR, your favorite, one
That's
of your
right,
favorite
that's right.
stations.
Yeah, I think, if we're going to talk about media monopoly, then we have to talk about National Public Radio. Because of the way they use their influence, lobbying Congress along with the National Association of Broadcasters, a commercial group, to kill micro radio. And my opinion is that they view micro radio as a great threat. Because if people in their communities actually heard a radio station that represented the diversity of opinion within their community, they would realize what a miserable failure National Public Radio is. And that's why they lobbied against it. They want to maintain their monopoly. And just like the right-wing hosts like Gallagher and Limbaugh promote an agenda, National Public Radio promotes an agenda too. Their target audience is much more sophisticated, and their propaganda techniques are more sophisticated. But I don't think there should be any mistake that they are promoting a political agenda, and it's one that excludes people from many different types of people. And a contrast, if you watch C-SPAN, C-SPAN is probably the organization that's doing the best job of fulfilling the mission of public radio, because they have everyone from Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh to Noam Chomsky, Norman Solomon, Aaron Dottie Roy. They really have the full spectrum of opinion in this country, and what you get on right-wing radio is over here, and what you get on NPR is right here, but they're both promoting a political agenda.
We were talking about NPR. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. Not radio, but TV. Newt Gingrich, former right-wing congressperson, Speaker of the House, he wanted to get rid of PBS, or drastically reduce federal funding. And what he found out was that PBS is not this left-wing attractive thing for out there that the Barbra Streisands are giving money for, but it's something that middle-of-the-road people and right-wing corporations are supporting.
Yeah.
So he quickly lost support for cutting that back. So it ties in with what you're saying, that NPR, I don't know if I go quite as far as you in talking about NPR, but they're certainly middle-of-the-road organizations, and
Definitely.
NPR, PBS, Public Broadcasting System, they're not the left-wing ideologues that they're made out to be.
We've had a history of talking about NPR on the show before. Did they play that show? The
Alternative radio?
Alternative radio?
I don't know. I forgot to listen last Sunday.
Oh.
In their magazine, that said that alternative radio has a permanent slot now, 8 p.m. Sundays. Two weeks ago, I listened and it wasn't on then. So
Somebody else is
I'll
playing.
have to be listening. It's supposed to be 8 o'clock Sunday evening.
Yeah.
We'll see if they play it.
And if you want to make your own radio, if you want to do a little civil disobedience, we were involved a little bit, maybe me more than Adam, in getting a micro radio, so-called pirate station going in Iowa City for a while. Didn't interfere with any other stations,
Right.
and it had limited broadcast, but
Right.
you were able to get a different point of view,
Right.
and it's still going on.
I think they're still going. I haven't tuned in it lately, but I thought they were still going. Yeah, as far as I knew.
You can get a kid for a few hundred and start doing your own.
Right.
Just
Couple-
don't
I
go on
think it's
someone else's
Couple $100,
frequency.
yeah.
What's the frequency, Kenneth?
It's 88.7. Is that right?
I think that's right.
I think it's 88.7. Yeah.
So look for that.
You can't get it too far. It doesn't have a huge area, but you could probably get it in Coralville on a good day. I don't know.
Bring your radios to Critical Mass, and
There
we'll
you go.
listen to it on
There
our
you go.
bikes. Going to tell you again that I'm Stephen Canner, and this is Iowa City's Other News, coming to you live on Saturday, July 26, 2003. We're a few white guys talking about white guys on hate radio, and we're talking about a few other things from a progressive point of view. We're going to be with you for another 20, 25 minutes. I got Adam Burke, Greg Thompson. Greg's going to give us a little outrage in about 10, 15 minutes.
I'm outraged.
He's building up right now. You can see it inside. I don't think I've seen Greg get mad.
Oh, you don't want to see that.
Oh, that's good. He's got this nice place a little bit outside the city, an acre or two, and it's just a very peaceful place with beautiful flowers that we got. And
That's right. Thank
and
you.
we have, he's living with the set designer, should we say, the word is out, Gene Thompson over here. And so we're thankful for the Green Acres out there.
Yeah.
And, but I want to tell the control room, get ready with that other tape. We're going to start talking now about something that's pretty exciting to me and my friend Carly Whitaker, Seabiscuit,
Right.
the movie Seabiscuit.
Right. I
That-
can't wait to see that movie, actually. I'm really looking forward to it.
Do you know the story of Seabiscuit?
I don't know. Just tell us.
I barely. I know it was a horse kind of given up, a crooked leg horse or something. And then some trainer took it, and I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know as much as you probably. Some trainer took it and said, I'm going to train it this special way or something. And you've got the book and everything. Look at this.
The book is out, and I'm going to ask Elliot over here on the camera if he can come in on this. This is Seabiscuit, an American Legend by Laura Hillenbrand. She's a hot new author. Are you getting this on there?
There it is.
There we go.
All right. There, that's better. Okay. Got this out of our great public library. As an aside, you see there's letters now about privately funding libraries. One of our great socialist institutions, the library, that's open to everybody of economic range and background. People are talking about cutting government funding. That should be the last thing. That's the thing that
Yeah.
makes our country great, especially Iowa City. It makes it a great city is our library. This is from our library, Seabiscuit. And Laura Hillenbrand is the new media star. And she wrote this book about Seabiscuit, who in the 30s just captivated the whole country, apparently. As you said, this horse that wasn't winning, taken over by Tom Smith, the trainer, and Charles Howard, Buick dealer who was a millionaire in San Francisco, made his millions out there. And then the jockey, Red Pollard, and all three lives interacted with a fourth life, Seabiscuit, this horse that everyone thought was washed up, and came on to great things in the mid-30s when people were desperate for some sort of hope in the midst of the Depression, and people latched on to this underdog. And Carly Whitaker said, Dennis Kucinich is the Seabiscuit of our time, so that long shot. In fact, I'm a Dennis Kucinich supporter. I don't know if you can see the button here. Again, another close-up. We got Elliot working here. But
Spin it around.
spin it around. You got it there? But I think he's the true progressive candidate out there. He's the one who's the only one who's calling for a health care plan that has some definitive points to it, a single-payer program, and he's talking about cutting back the military budget. Dean's not doing that. George Bush, of course, wants to increase that. He's anti-war. He's pro-people. He's pro-choice. We talked about him before. So the analogy is Kucinich is the long shot that's has a chance to win and take on the war admirals, like Seabiscuit took on War Admiral. Kucinich is going to take on the modern-day war admirals. We have Seabiscuit wanting to have a match race with War Admiral, the Triple Crown winner in the mid-30s, owned by Sam Riddle, old money, rich guy from the East Coast. So I guess if you're going to pick your rich white guy, we're taking Howard on the West Coast over Riddle as the Dick Cheney of modern days. And we have War Admiral, son of the great man of war, sort of like George W., the son of
Wow,
Bush
this
Sr.
is
So let's see if we can...
Detailed mythology.
And this
there.
is taken up, the national campaign is picking this up from our own Iowa City's Carly Whitaker. And let's see if we can roll that tape, and then we'll talk about it for a few minutes, and then we'll go to Greg.
You have a downtrodden, Charlie Chaplin-esque figure who comes out of the mire and the sorry exploitation of the little man, Probably there were people who thought to themselves, I'm making $20 a week. It's enough to support my family, but I could lose my job tomorrow. But maybe someday I'll come back and be the great guy I always was destined to be. Look at Seabiscuit, he did it.
All across the country, people who'd never even been to a racetrack caught the fever. One sports writer called it Seabiscuititis.
Americans are ready for a new vision. They're ready for a dynamic approach. They're ready for somebody who's willing to stand up and speak out and challenge this administration. We can win this. We want a new administration, elect a new president. That's why I'm running. That's why I'm running. That's why I'm running.
We want to come on over here. We're going to do Where's the Outrage in just a minute. This is a poster that's getting distributed nationally. It was exciting to hear Kucinich. I don't know
It
if
was,
you're
it was.
You have some reservations
No,
about
I
Kucinich.
think I'm going to vote for him. I mean, as it stands now, that's my candidate, yeah.
I think he's the only one.
It's hard for me to jump in this early in a race. You know, last time I waited and didn't decide until, you know, the week before or something. I think a lot of people do that, so I'm probably like most people, that I usually wait until probably it's too late to really get an idea of who I should vote for, and then it's also too late to do any campaigning and supporting and rallying around a candidate, so this time I'm going to jump in early, and right now it's Dennis for me.
You can meet with other Dennis Kucinich, Congressperson Dennis Kucinich supporters August 7th. Look for him on a meetup website, 2003. He's also coming to Ottumwa tomorrow, I believe that is, for one of Senator Harkin's forums. So if you want to go down to hear that, a few of us are going. Give a call, 338-8865.
I heard he's going to do some concerts with Willie Nelson.
Couple concerts, yes, with
That
Willie
sounds
Nelson.
cool. That sounds great. I'd definitely check that out.
The fundraiser in Iowa, I think, is about Labor Day or so,
Labor
somewhere
Day,
around
okay.
there. And then he's going to do a couple more in Cleveland and Madison. So that's a person that people haven't heard of, Dennis Kucinich.
Right.
He's the long shot. He's not being mentioned often in the same breath even as Dean. But I think, like Seabiscuit, he'll come roaring through.
Well, article I read recently said all the candidates are trying to out-Dean Dean. And Kucinich out-Dean Dean before Dean tried to out-Dean Dean, or whatever. I don't know what I'm
It's a
saying.
Dean, a Dean.
But I think a lot of articles that I read say, it's Howard Dean. And then they go on about Howard Dean and never even say this guy's name, Dennis Kucinich. And Kucinich is probably, for some people, a more viable candidate, someone they agree with more. But yeah, I'm going to vote for him. I'm going to vote, Steve. That doesn't hold a lot of weight in this town, who I'm going to vote for.
Yes, it does, Adam Burke. Longtime volunteer and employee at PATV and activist around town. We're going to go now to Greg Thompson, who's going to do our Where's the Outrage segment for today. And then we'll bring Greg back to talk a little bit more with us about that. Greg?
Thanks, Stephen. Where's the outrage? That's what I always want to know. There's so many outrageous things going on. Why aren't people leaning out the window and saying, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore? That's only in the movies, I guess. I want to draw your attention to a few things that I found in my web surfing. This I first found on the Common Dreams website. It's a great website. If you haven't checked it out, please do so. And this is reprinted from the Rocky Mountain News, July 24th, an article by Mike Litwin. And he talks about how 3 Dominican nuns, Carol Gilbert, Jackie Hudson, and Ardith Platt, were facing many years in jail because they poured their own blood and hammered on a Minuteman missile silo in northeastern Colorado. In the paper this morning, we saw that they were sentenced to 2.5 years, these 3 nuns. And I think it's outrageous that people who go out and commit symbolic acts in the name of peace are jailed, while those who commit overt acts of war are appointed president or given awards and paid taxpayer money. The next story I'd like to bring your attention to is one that is written by Robert Fisk of The Independent. I've been following Robert Fisk's editorials, or excuse me, his reporting on the war in Iraq ever since the beginning, and he is the best source of news. He is not an embedded reporter. He's been all over Iraq, and he reports on a fellow named Mohammed Al-Salman, who is an engineer who has worked in Africa, Asia, and Europe. He's a Danish citizen, speaks good English, and even likes America, says Robert Fisk, or at least he did until June 6th of this year, when the car he was in was fired upon by American troops, and they stopped. The two men who were with him got out and ran and were killed. He stayed by the car with his hands up, where he was arrested. This is the most shocking part of the story, and I'll quote from Robert Fisk here. The next bit of this story carries implications for our own journalistic profession. After 10 minutes in the vehicle, in handcuffs, I was taken out again. There were journalists with cameras. The Americans untied me, then made me lie on the road again. Then, in front of the cameras, they tied my hands and feet all over again and put me back in the vehicle for the benefit of the television cameras. Amnesty International has investigated where up to 2,000 prisoners live in hot, airless tents in Baghdad. This is where Al-Salman was sent, where he was kept for over 30 days under brutal conditions, never charged with anything, and then suddenly released. I found that story to be outrageous, because here was somebody who is a friend of the United States who, because of the way he's treated, no longer is. This is from the bizarre file, I guess you'd have to say. I found this on ZNet, zmagazine.org, or zmag.org, one of the best news sites out there. This is reprinted from the Village Voice by Nikos Balance. The Orwellian rewriting of history continues. George W. Bush has said, and let me quote, asked about the infamous 16 words in his State of the Union address about Iraq shopping in Niger for yellow cake uranium, the leader of the free world replied, the larger point is, the fundamental question is, did Saddam have a weapons program? The answer is absolutely. And we gave him a chance to allow inspectors in, and he wouldn't let them in. And therefore, after a reasonable request, we decided to remove him from power. Well, if anybody's memory goes back as far as 4 or 5 months ago, you'll remember that UN inspectors were going all over Iraq freely. Apparently W can't remember that. This goes along the lines of the lies that we are told by the likes of Colin Powell, who said Saddam kicked the weapons inspectors out of Iraq in 1998, when he knows full well that they were withdrawn so that Iraq could be bombed. And this goes largely unchallenged. I thought it was interesting in this article, which is from the Toronto Star by Antonia Zerbesius, the Washington Post, Dana Milbank, soft-pedaled this story when she said, the president's assertion that the war began because Iraq did not admit inspectors appeared to contradict events leading up to the war. Yeah, I think it appeared to as well. So, I don't know, these are just a few of the outrages I found on the internet, and maybe we can talk about some of these a little more, Stephen and Adam. Thanks, this is Greg Thompson. I'm outraged.
Thank you, Greg. Well put. It is hard to remember 4 months ago. I want to let people know that you're watching Iowa City's Other News. Little brother is watching you out there, and we're keeping an eye on the progressive beat here in Iowa City. It's live Saturday, July 26th, and a week and a half after Bastille Day. We got the Perseid meteor showers coming up.
Okay.
An annual event that we don't have to do anything about. Just go out and enjoy. You don't have to spend a lot of money for that.
Would you say it was August 2nd? Is that something?
August 2nd is an anniversary date of the Black Hawk
Okay.
massacre in 1832, Black Hawk was trying to do a little resistance of his own against an imperialist U.S. Army that was helping people to expand westward, eventually into Iowa and beyond, and he resisted with a band of people from the SAC, and eventually he gave up and was ready to surrender and go into Iowa across the Mississippi, and the powers that be would have none of that, and they gunned down most of the people. Apparently he was waving a white flag on a sandbar, and there was a translator on one of the gunboats, and they gunned his people down. Miraculously, he survived, and he was taken prisoner to the East Coast and became quite famous, and then eventually died in Iowa at about 1850 or so, I believe. So the connection to today is that it's bad enough how history is rewritten all the time, but now we're using Black Hawk name to promote helicopters that are killing people in Colombia. The government and vigilante paramilitary groups are killing innocents by the thousands, civil rights workers, human rights workers, labor people in Colombia. Some say it's again for oil. There's an oil line that we're trying to protect in Colombia, and probably want to get some cheap bananas there. But August 2nd is an anniversary of that.
And don't forget the Apache and the Tomahawk.
Apache and the Tomahawk.
We appropriated the names of these conquered tribes in the name of our offensive weapons.
You talked about three issues. First is a plowshare action. It was called, the Berrigan brothers often did similar actions based in Christian belief on the Hebrew Bible of turning swords into plowshares.
Yes.
And so they literally go out and try to do that, hammer on.
These women were directly inspired by Tony Berrigan?
Philip Berrigan and
Daniel?
Daniel Berrigan,
Daniel,
that's right.
yeah.
One who recently died.
Right. I think
Right.
Philip just died in Daniels. I read an interview with him in the Sun magazine last month.
This touches your family as well, Stephen. Your sister spent a considerable time in federal prison, I believe, for protesting at the School of Americas.
6 months. It wasn't terrible confinement, but any confinement is bad. And I would say a day would be a suitable punishment for doing this kind of civil disobedience. Put someone in jail for a day. Certainly, we have rapists in our town. They get off with nothing, and they're allowed to play their sport again. And people of all ages assaulting others, and they get a slap on the head. And it goes. There's a direct correlation between a national policy that uses violence to solve things and individuals, and I think that's happening, and you pointed that out. Any other things that are happening in Iowa City that you want to touch on, Adam?
I
What's
just saw
up?
this one. The Iowa City School District is putting wind to the test. They're going to put up an anemometer to measure wind speed for the next year in North Liberty, where they're going to build that new school. The school bond we were talking about earlier, that's pretty progressive to fuel or to supply a school with energy that is renewable, that's basically free. I hope we do more of that in this state for sure. I think Iowa, I heard David Osterberg. Is it Osterberg? Osterberg.
Yes, Osterberg.
Osterberg said that Iowa could be the #3 wind energy producer in the country because we have such good wind speeds and constant wind and stuff. Right now, I think it's California's #1. He said their potential is way low on the list. They're about mid-range for states in the U.S., but Iowa could be near the top. We could actually be an exporter of wind energy, but we have so little of it going now. So this is definitely a step in the right direction. It's just a test right now, but they are out there today building that. So if anyone wants to drop by today, July 26th, it's on Front Street in North Liberty, where they're going to build some of the new schools up there.
Winona LaDuke, vice presidential candidate, said Iowa is the Saudi Arabia
Right.
of the world, of the Midwest. And the school board has shown us time and time again that they're the most progressive elected body in Johnson County. They have a majority that's a good progressive body. They have another candidate that's running, I forget her last name, I'm sorry, she, Mary, I apologize, I can't.
Who's she going to replace someone?
Well, there's 2 seats that are open, 2
Oh, okay.
incumbents, and she's a good candidate. And as far as wind is concerned, Iowa City looked at wind for some of its utilities, the wastewater, the landfill, and the water plant. And an initial study came out so-so, saying that maybe we need further studies. And so hopefully we can make use of these wind measuring devices and see if we can make it work. I think oftentimes our city goes to a pretty good level, but doesn't go that extra step. And that's what's missing. I think we need to push if we want to go that extra step.
Yeah.
Before we continue talking for a couple more minutes, I want to ask Ellie to get ready with the closing credits. And I don't think we have any video to run
I
those
don't
over.
think so,
We'll
no.
just run them over us talking. It's better looking than our
Right.
3 faces. We've got just a few more minutes. Again, I want to let people know you're watching Iowa City's Other News. A few white guys talking about white guys on hate radio and a few other issues. What's happening in Iowa City around the world. Greg, what's happening in your corner?
I'm pulling weeds in the garden fast as I can pull them. I think something that, if we could go back to a national issue, we had Michelle Kenyon on here a few weeks ago. She's talking about the FCC decision. I think we can all take a little encouragement from the fact that the House of Representatives voted to reverse Michael Powell's FCC decision on opening up the ownership of television stations, 400 to 22. And I was glad to see that many Republicans bucking the Bush administration.
Yeah.
He's threatened to veto it. I think the veto would be overridden.
I think so too.
I think, a rare note of congratulations goes to the Republican House of Representatives and the Democrats who voted to reverse this outrageous decision.
Michael Powell, son of Colin Powell, is looking for a new job.
Well,
So if anyone wants to hire a former FCC chairperson, he's going to step down as chairperson, I heard.
Well, we can't pay him anything, but we're always looking for members of the Iowa City
Right,
Other News
right, we are.
Collective. He's welcome to join us,
That's a
gather
good
some
point.
experience and
That's a
other
good
experience
point,
that will look good on the resume.
Yeah, we could let him run a camera like we let Elliot do nowadays.
Yeah.
We won't let him be on the show.
Someday Elliot and Mr.
No, he
Powell.
Elliot hosted last week, so we put him back in the booth, right?
Yeah, there is some cause for optimism.
That
We
is.
had the House there. I think there's, the House has voted or is going to vote to try to overturn some of the Patriot Act provisions, which are set to run out. We had the Supreme Court decision on gay rights, pretty hideous decision 20 years ago of setting our country back decades when they came out against gay rights. Human rights, it's basically human rights with some of the language that was used, but a 6-3 decision was pretty solid, saying that in private, consenting adults can do what they want.
Right.
It's nice to hear. So that
Yeah,
gives,
it's a big
I think,
sigh
all
of
of
relief.
us-
A big sigh of relief for me.
Yeah, it makes us feel good that that's happening.
and then Pat Robertson initiated a prayer campaign, hoping that the three of the justices who were on the majority side that would get sick and have to step down, so they could be replaced with real conservatives.
I see. Huh. Did that work out for you? Is that usually a good strategy?
The prayers.
Prayer campaign?
Prayer strategy.
I've never tried that one.
We're going to work on it.
Yeah.
Adam, anything, final thoughts?
I am also encouraged by that FCC thing. I'm pretty psyched about that. We'll see if it passes the Senate too, and what Bush does with that info. I have to say, I think it's not in this paper, but yesterday's thing on the 9/11 probe, the committee. I think we're going to see Bush's ratings just continue to slip because he lied to us. He got us into an unjust war. There are some serious questions about that man's integrity that I think will come under the scope, hopefully, and people will get off his bandwagon and get on, well, maybe Dennis Kucinich. could replace. I wouldn't have any problems with Dennis Kucinich replacing George Bush. It'd be a contrast in administrations, I bet.
A little bit, I would say. And you can only give out so much money to rich people.
Right,
George
right,
Bush has given
right.
out plenty. He's gotten plenty in return.
right.
But it's got to stop somewhere,
Right.
hopefully.
right. Well, the economy is bad. That's
Yeah.
the other thing I want to say is, yeah.
And hopefully we can get it turned around and move it in the right direction, get
Right.
some decent paying jobs. I know I can
right.
use one.
I could, yeah, I'm ready.
Probably could all use one. All right, I think we've reached the end of our hour. We've chit-chatted away, had some nice conversation. I want to thank the people back in our control room. We have Adam Rohr, who was helping us out, and we also have Elliot Campbell back there. Thanks, you folks. You did a very good job. Appreciate that. Greg Thompson, who went out with the camera and got some footage, also was our guest today. And Where's the Outrage? He's doing that triple
Double
play.
dipping, yeah. Oh, triple play.
Triple
That's right.
play
That's
there.
right. He did graphics too. Did you see that?
And graphics too. He quadruple play,
I'm all
almost
over the
unheard.
place.
A quadruple
everywhere.
double. Adam Burke, thank you, a guest today, and
Thanks for
helping
having
out
me.
with technical expertise and everything else. And I'm Stephen Cannon. You're watching Iowa City's Other News. We broadcast live every 2 or 3 weeks, and rebroadcasts are Wednesday at 10 p.m. and Saturdays at 11 a.m. until our next subsequent show, live show, and they're on PATV, your community access station, channel 18 on cable. If you don't have cable, like people like me, go to the laundromat.
Oh, the laundromat?
It has TV,
Huh.
and usually you can pick your channel, or you can go to the bar and say, I want to watch
Right,
Iowa
right.
City's Other News
Right.
Wednesdays at 10. I don't think there's a bar in town that doesn't have a TV nowadays.
With cable, too.
With cable.
Yeah.
So
Most of them, yeah.
it's out there.
Hey,
Yeah.
for the record, I don't have cable either. So, and I work here. You can also come down to PATV and watch our channel.
Yep,
If you want to.
Saturday morning.
PATV, you can come and watch us. And I don't know, did you run the contact numbers? Did you do that,
They're at
Elliot?
I think they're at the bottom of the screen.
Okay, they're at the bottom of the screen. I do want to wish Michelle Kenyon, our Outrage guest a few weeks ago, congratulations on her wedding to Bennett Brown. It's now Michelle also, she goes by Mia Kenyon Brown and Bennett Kenyon Brown. They were wedded last week.
That's great.
Good.
They're great assets to the regional community. We
Yeah.
appreciate having them
Yeah.
there. Thanks, and that's it for Iowa City's Other News.
Seabiscuit.
Take it easy, but take it.
Oh, fade to blue.